As David Lynch's Mulholland Drive reminds us, everything is recorded. That was quite predictive, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Welcome everybody to the last keynote, special keynote, the Forum Humanum Lecture 2024. And it's an enormous pleasure and honor to introduce Yasuo Deguchi from Kyoto University to this community. In addition to being our Forum Humanum lecturer, Yasuo this year also participated with his group in sending the first Japanese delegation to our consortium. And one of the many reasons why we decided to expand our conversation is precisely the substantial work that's done both at Kyoto University, but also at the Kyoto Institute of Philosophy, with which both of us are involved, Yasuo as one of the chairmen, and I as senior global advisor. So the fundamental intellectual mission of Yasuo Deguchi can be summarized by what we'll hear today, his contribution to the we turn, or the various we turns. So being, fully trained in all sorts of dimensions of classical philosophy, Kant and the Kyoto school in particular, but also larger Buddhist thought, including most prominently his work about Dogen, and then undergoing also a full training in the various methodologies of what we call analytic philosophy, deciphering many of the Asian traditions with this lens. Yasuo then, started becoming a self-moving philosopher under the banner of the we turn, and we'll hear more details about that. And he was quite crucial, on the level of philosophical institutional design to establish, Asian analytic philosophy, which is now a widely accepted way of practicing non-Western philosophy and becoming part of the curriculum almost everywhere. So Yasuo was like part of all of this in earlier conversations with Graham Priest, Jay Garfield, and many others. The We Turn program has various dimensions, some of which significantly deal with AI in particular. And as we know, there's like a superficial understanding of a potential Japanese contribution to AI, and it goes something like animism and the communitarian nature of Japanese society. But if you zoom in, right, then this is of course just a superficial appearance of where the true action is. So there is a very relevant Japanese way of thinking about AI and society, but it's not it's not that superficial story. So the we turn, among other things, then can be read as a clarification of the sense in which we can derive a certain primacy of the we from the Japanese tradition, but it's not specifically about that. I mean, we have been having various conversations about Hegel, and of course the agenda is not to show that the we turn is Japanese, right? Though it happens to have very important roots there. It's of course a universal view about the structure of social formations, the fundamental structure of social formations. It's a social ontology, among other things, but it is intellectually rooted in non-Western thought in a excellently carried out manner. So that much for Yasuo Deguchi, and we decided that he would be a great Forum Humanum lecturer this year also, with the, given that we're discussing the entanglement of the AI revolution and social change. And so what better than, someone who has been thinking about this in theory and also in practice. So welcome, Yasuo, to the New School. We're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the we turn, and then we have enough time to really discuss this in depth with you. Welcome.
Okay. Great introduction to the very humble philosopher, that is me. And also, first, let me thanks too much to the Kai and some other people who make this event, brilliant event possible, and who make me here. Okay, so this is a time for we very shortly. Okay, this is the outline of my talk, but I can stop anywhere if you like. Okay, so first, let me mention some East Asian, including Japanese traditions.
I think you might need a microphone for the recording.
Yes. For the recording.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first let me mention some East Asian, including Japanese traditions. That is something behind my return philosophies. Okay, that's the traditional part, Asian part. Then, so let me go directly to my own philosophical system, that is returns. Then, let me explore one of its consequences about human-AI relationship that Marcus just briefly mentioned. And if I have a time, let me go to the sort of concept or mission of a newly established Kyoto Institute of Philosophy. Okay, that's plan. Okay, East Asian background. So let me mention two traditions in East Asia, China, maybe Korea, and Japan as well. And one is what I call the genealogy of holy fool. And foolishness is a sort of intellectual incapabilities, according to the Western mainstream traditions, including Aristotle. Foolishness or incapability is not a good thing. It's just a vice. But in some corners of East Asia, foolishness is taken to be not vice, not defeat, but virtue. And what's best virtue. And we can mention many good names in the Taoistic traditions, and then or Chen Buddhistic tradition, or Pure Land traditions in China, East Asia, and Japan, that place highest respect to the foolishness or intellectual incapability, on the condition that, of course, the person should be aware of his or her own foolishness, and that leads to the humbleness to himself or herself and to others. And of course, foolishness itself is not so great. Only when that is combined with self-recognition of that, and that leads to the humbleness to others, all others, entities or animals in the world, then foolishness is very important. And that is actually one of the best virtues of all. And so maybe we can think of what is the difference between Socrates' ideas. Okay, that sounds some sort of similarities here. But this similarity as well. In the case of Socrates' traditions, okay, so recognition of lack of knowledge, ignorance, is very important. But that is taken to be the starting point to seek or love for knowledge. That's the starting point of philosophy. And that implies, at least to some extent, we can gain knowledge. We can seek philosophies, and to some extent, we can get some knowledge. But that is not the case for these traditions. Foolishness is foolishness. There's no possibility for improvement of that. This is a very bottom recognition, the place of where I am. I am in the place of foolishness. There is no hope. There's no possibility to improve that, okay, to make the change. But that is a human conditions. And this deepest of bottom self-recognition makes oneself very, very humble to all the other people or animals, entity in the world. So here is a very crucial difference between this tradition and Socrates' ideas. Right? That is one. Okay. And the other, right-hand side, here's another East Asian or more broader Asian tradition of idea of self. That is one of the Buddhistic idea of self. And Buddhism is very famous for its claim about no self, according to which there is no such a kind of self. That's a very famous, themes, Buddhistic theme for self. But important, this is just one of many or of three or more Buddhistic conceptions of self. No self there, but one of the oldest or even older Buddhistic idea of self is neutral theories. When Shakyamuni is asked, is there self or not? His answer, don't ask that stupid, superficial, useless metaphysical questions. Just concentrate Buddhistic practice. Don't waste any time for that kind of metaphysical ideas or questions. That's one of the first idea of a Buddhistic conception of self. So no neutralism, okay, quite neutral to that kind of metaphysical issues. Then no self theory came, that's the second. And the third one is here. That is called true self theory, according to which there is true self. What is that? So there are many theories about that. But the important point is about true self is non-individualistic. True self is not confined to individuality, to individual body, individual mind. It is wider than that. So more or less holistic. How far holistic? This depends on the people's ideas. Some said that's just the world. Some says other thing. But the important thing of true self characteristics is non-individualities. So here is a sort of a common strategies between no self theory, true self theory, that appear to oppose each other. No self theory said there's no self. True self theory, there's a true self. But they agree in one important point. Self is not individualistic. And attachment to this individualistic self, that's the source of all delusions, all sufferings. So that's a common theme for both, camps, right? So this is one of the three important Buddhistic ideas of self, and that become very, very, fashionable, popular in China and Korea, Japan, and other East Asia countries. Okay, and that actually one was the background of Japanese philosophy from the middle of 19th century, including Kyoto School of Philosophical Traditions. So maybe you might know its founder's name, Kitaro Nishida. Okay, so yes, Kyoto School. I should go to the Kyoto School. Yeah, okay, Kyoto School. And Kitaro Nishida is the founder of Kyoto School. And he made very strange terms, idiosyncratic words from one to another throughout his philosophical career. But, yes. Here. So he coined many, idiosyncratic terms from pure experience and absolute will and place or basho and absolute nothingness. That is one of the most famous ones, and some others. But in my views, all of these Nishida's very specific terms is one or another rephrasal. So philosophical conceptualization of true self. That is not individualistic, quite holistic. And two other very important characters of a true self is, one is embodied or enactive. The third is non-dual. That cannot be captured by any dualistic conceptualizations. So three characters here, holistic, or at least non-individualistic, embodied, enactive, and non-dual. So Nishida tried to capture this idea of a true self in one way or another. And that is the case for almost all major figures of Kyoto school, philosophers. So there are some faces or photos here, Tanabe Hajime, Keiji Nishitani, Tetsuro, Watsuji, many others. They invented their own idiosyncratic terms. But all of them, in my view, can be taken as one or another philosophical conceptualizations of this true self. Okay, so in nutshell, what is the Kyoto school? There are some trial attempt to define that, characterizations. Some says Kyoto school is a school of absolute nothingness. Some said, okay, that is a sort of intellectual group led by Nishida, Tanabe, or big names. But my definition here, Kyoto school is a philosophical school that tries to recapitulate or reactivate philosophically East Asian tradition true self in the contemporary world or contemporary philosophical context. Kyoto school is a school of true self. That's my idea. Okay, then we turn. And we turn, my philosophy has been inspired by those traditions, holy who traditions, and true self traditions, including Kyoto school. But inspirational source is one thing. Reasons, grounds, and justification are another. So I try to build this we turn system from the bottom, without relying on big names, a great name in the past. So this is a purely philosophical system that has some philosophical assumptions and some inferences from them. And then we can lead to some consequences or themes or theorems. That is a we turns or many things. Okay, we turn is a purely philosophical system based on assumption, or presupposition, and inferences, right? Okay, so this is a very rough idea of a first we turn. There are many we turns. The first one is most fundamental. That is a we turn of doer, or subject of our somatic actions, right? And usually, who is, talking to you? I. One individual called Yasuo Deguchi. That's a very standard ideas. But let me turn that idea from I speak to you to we speak to you. Generally speaking, from I do X, many X, to we do X. So now the subject or unit of all somatic action, bodily actions, is shifted from I to we. That's the we turn of a doer. That's the first very important we turns. Right. And let me mention, okay, how we can derive this kind of strange ideas, shift from I do to we do. In my view, we need just 3 assumptions. That's enough. One assumption, that's I think the most fundamental assumptions of a we turn. Let me call that first incapability thesis. That's the thesis, fundamental, universal, unavoidable incapabilities of all human beings. We cannot escape from that, I claim. What kind of incapability is here? So this is incapability of single action. Right. That means any individual, maybe humans or robots or AIs or whatever animals, cannot perform any somatic action alone. But we can do many things from the morning to the night. How and why? Because being supported, afforded, many agents. Of course, I is very important, essential, necessary, but I is not enough. Many agents, humans and non-human animals, plants, artifacts, microphone, environmental stuffs, atmosphere, gravity field, those kind of things are essential. Any single human behavior is always afforded by many environmental factors. That may be including our ancestors, whole human histories, that kind of thing. So this is a sort of, let me call, multi-agent system. There are many different kind of agent. Some has intentionally support my doing something. Some are just, neutral. But in the end, in effect, they exercise some causal efficacy to make my doing something possible. In such a way, there are many agents putting together, forming one single system. This system makes my doing something always possible. How we can call this system? Okay, this is not simply they or it, because that should contain important element. That is the I. And that is the double aspect. One is a plural aspect, because there should be many agents, more than two. And this all agent put together to form one single system. What is that? That is we. Okay. We has a double aspect, unitary aspect, and plural aspect. And that should always contain I. So let me call this multi-agent system. That is a system of all necessary agent to make my doing something possible. Every agent, element of this system is necessary agent, essential, indispensable agent. And all necessary agents should be included in this system, nothing else. That is we here. That is a multi-agent system. And this system is a subject of every single somatic action I claim. But anyway, so this is the first assumption. And second assumption is doer externalism, let me call that. So its opposite is a doer internalism. Doer internalism claims that doer of a subject of action should always be aware of its doing that actions. So this subject should be within the realm of a consciousness or self-consciousness. But doer externalism says no. So doer or subject of doing something, yes, can be maybe outside the realm of consciousness. Sometimes maybe within the consciousness, but in some cases at least, subject or doer of somatic action cannot be aware of its doing that actions. Okay. It sounds first strange, but let me one possible example for that. There are many systems, ecosystem, computer system that can perform something. And system is abstract entities that doesn't have any mind, any mental states, so any consciousness at all. Consciousness of it's doing something, doing some computer systemizing. But anyway, that is doing something at least. And some ideas that's quite common or popular in a computer human design. So man-machine system, man-machine, man-computer symbiosis. So there are very common ideas in the building or designing computer systems. And one of the advocates of that idea are Rick Riders. He's also dubbed as the father of the internet. Wrote in very important influential paper that, in my translations, in a sense, okay, this computer system, rather than computer or human users, system itself think. System itself data processing.
That's his ideas. Don't think about computer is data processing. Don't think that human being doing that. But importantly, system between the two is a subject of a data processing and thinking. That's Rick Ryder's ideas. Here we can find one clear example of dual externalism. I don't say that Rick Ryder is correct. Maybe he made some mistake, of course. But one thing is clear. This dual externalism, not mystical ideas, not far away from our contemporary scientific, technological common sense. It's just neighbors, one extensions. Okay. So dual externalism is not so mystic, religious, Asian thought, but just sort of a continuations of today's computer design thinking. Right. So that is the second. And the third, that what is a dual subject? That is not mere necessary agent. That is not mere sufficient agent. That should be necessary and sufficient agent. I think this idea is quite self-evident. So sumo wrestling, that's a Japanese traditional sort of wrestling. That is, sort of match between the two small wrestlers. Okay, and each of these two small wrestlers is a necessary agent. But the mere necessary agent, one small wrestler, cannot subject of a small wrestling. One is not enough. Okay, so mere necessary agent cannot be subject of a small wrestling. How about three? Two small wrestlers and one, observer, spectators. These three or trio, yes, can be the sufficient agent of doing small, wrestling. But this three trio is not subject of a small wrestling. Who is a subject of small wrestling? Just two small wrestlers. Okay. One is smaller, three is too big. And only two is a subject of doing small wrestling. And what is this two? That is necessary and sufficient agent. I think that's quite clear. So, putting these three assumptions. First assumption is an incapability thesis of single actions. That implies, multi-agent system that includes I and many other agents. That is the necessary and sufficient agent. But that is abstract entities. That's okay, according to the second assumption, dual externalism. In some cases, at least, we can take these abstract entities as a subject of doing something. And this is the necessary and sufficient agent that should be the subject. Putting these three assumptions, result is now very clear. That is a we term of a doer, from I do to we do. There's no mystical idea here. There's no trick here. From this assumption, if we are happy to accept, so natural consequence is the first we term. And this first we term should give a very big impact to the many philosophical systems. Okay. And first, yes, that's the second we term. We term of self. What is self? Many ideas. So Buddhistic, ideas I mentioned, no self, a true self, many other Buddhistic idea of self there. And many philosophers, East and West, and classical contemporary, and thought of their own idea of self. But here's one of the very standard common idea of self. What is self? That is a subject of somatic actions, our bodily movement. That's quite common say, in a cognitive science. Cognitive scientists often mention the self in this sense. For them, self is a subject of our somatic actions, walking or even thinking, talking to you. Then we have already done, we turn of subject, doer, from I to we. Then self, according to its standard idea, subject of doer or doer. Then natural consequence is the second we turn from self as I to self as we. Right. Then these two we turns putting together can have a more important stuff to be we turned. So many value ideas such as rights, human rights, animal rights, many other stuff's rights should also be we turned. But this doesn't imply that there's no my rights. There is my rights. Because I is an essential, indispensable element of we, multi-agent system. So there is my rights. But this my right made sense only within the scheme, context of we's right, our rights. And the same can be said about responsibilities. So I should have a responsibility, but this, my responsibility made possible only within the context of we's responsibility, our responsibility. But very important thing that not every member of a multi-agent system should have a same responsibility. That's too much. So each agent in one system, we, has a different mode, different degree of agencies. Some are central, some has a very heavy agency for doing something. Some are very remote, very peripheral. So responsibility should be weighted, differentiated according to this difference in the mode or degrees of agencies. But still important thing that every member of we cannot escape at least minimum responsibility for doing bad thing. That is a we turn of responsibilities. And some other value concept, idea also we turned. One is well-being. Let me say something more about that. And also freedom. So here's very important. Thinking, decision-making, according to this we turn system, is nothing but special sort of somatic actions. Mental activity is not free from any somatic operations. That can happen only within the realm or system context of our bodily movement, bodily functioning. That means mental activity is just one subset of somatic actions. So now we have a we turn of somatic actions. Why not? We turn of, say, thinking. From I think to we think. From I decide to we decide. So from cogito to cogitans, plural. But important thing that I am very important still in this, we think, we decide. In the case of decisions, okay, so every single decision according to this idea is collective decisions. Something like a cooperative decision making. Big firm, big companies make some decisions. It has many different procedures, many different meetings or stages. But there should be some final decision-making stage. Maybe CEO, CFO, some that kind of a big guys sitting in one single room and make final decisions. Similar thing can be applied to any decision-making for and a very important life event choice. And I is always sitting the final table, final room. Many other peoples can participate in my decision making. Maybe my parents influence me. That means they participating my decision making now. But they are not this room. They are not in the final decision table room. I am always in the final decision room. So I am always final decision makers. But I am not monopolizers of decision making rights. I'm just many agents that influence this decision making in one way or another. But I'm very important. I am always as final decision makers. But final decision making is one thing. Monopolizer of decision making is quite another. So we should change idea of decision makers, decision making, and that should have a very great impact to our idea of autonomy. Kantian autonomies means that I'm a monopolizer. Many other people saying something, but they are not decision makers. They are just influencers. But there's only one decision maker, that is me. That's the grace, that's the freedom, that's the dignity of human being according to the Kant. But we has quite different pictures. I is important. I still have an autonomy, but this autonomy is not monopolizing decision-making power, right? So this autonomy is a sort of a finality of collective decision-making. Okay, that's great impact to the idea of freedom, because Kantian freedom is based on this monopolization myth, in my view. But anyway, so in such a way, so these very important value ideas, rights, responsibilities, well-being, freedom should be returned. Okay. And let me, yes. But returns is not, way to utopia. So maybe you can think of a return society, but that society is not simply merely utopia. Simply because there are many good I, bad I. I myself occasionally do good thing, but occasionally do bad thing. Just similarly, there are good we and bad we. So important thing, what is the goodness, what is the badness of we? And we should have moral responsibility to make itself, we, good, better, best. Any moral agent among the members of we has also moral obligations to make we to which it belongs, good, better, best. Then, what's the goodness of we? So there are many ideas here, but let me mention just one thing. One clear example of bad we, I think many of you should agree, totalitarian we, that's a bad we, right? So that's a jingoistic, exclusivist to the outside, and oppressivist to the inside, that's bad we. Okay. So what is a good we? That's a less totalitarian we. Okay. And here's another very important consequence from that. So we can have many, structures. There are many versions, types of we. Here's just two types. One type, that's the left-hand side. That we is a center-occupied we. We, the center, is occupied by some individual, some group, and all other members is putting aside. Okay. So, for example, one person occupies, all interest or hegemony of one single state. That's dictatorship. That's a bad thing. If one group over, social, structure, say some race, some gender, occupy the center, and setting aside others, that is social discriminations. If one species, human being, occupy the center of an ecosystem, and putting aside many other animals or lives. That's bad anthropocentrism. So this is a bad example of oppressions. Right. So this is a clear one example of bad we. So this is a bad structure we should avoid. And in this system, there should be always zero-sum game for occupying the center. Okay, try to occupy that. And putting aside many others. That's still sadly common in the international political scenes. That can be, we can see this kind of a zero-sum gaming structures in many corners of the society, even in the family or many other places. I think that is a bad phenomenon, bad symptom of this center-occupiedness of we, and that's quite common in the modern societies. We should say goodbye to that. So, to which directions? It's opposite. That is empty-centered we. Here, center of interest, or center of hegemony, should be always deliberately opened, emptied. No single person, no single specific social group, no single species should monopolize, occupy the center while excluding others. That is not good. So center should be emptied. Of course, every member of we, say humans and cockroach, have the same position. That's just too much. Human can occupy simply because they are moral agent. Not center, but paracenters. And some other animal who are not moral agent can be placed more, far away from centers. But there should be no, unilateral, asymmetrical relation between them. What is allowed morally is just difference in degree, not difference in the directions. That's the idea of empty-centeredness of we. Okay. Maybe let me skip here. I don't have enough time to that. But here's another interesting point, I think, this we term. I mentioned well-being. There are many well-being. What is a well-being? This is another very big contemporary hot issues. What is a well-being? I said, most primitive or archetypical version or type of well-being is well-going. What is well-going? That is an inactive version of well-being. Well-being can mean many things. For example, some passive enjoyment of pleasure, very somatic pleasure or intellectual pleasure. But this is not inactive. Inactive well-being is something to be felt in the middle course of doing something, somatic actions, thinking that, okay, something is going well. Okay, so I and you put together to do something, a collective action, business, or something like that, project. And members of that project can feel, okay, something is now going well. So this project is going to the good direction, at least now. So this is an active feeling or an active state of well-being. And I claim this is archetypical, most fundamental, or earliest in our development of feeling or experience of well-being. So well-going, that's the primitive and most, first original idea of well-being. That's my claim. Anyway, yes. Okay, then now I am approaching the human-AI relationship. I said, okay, some we are good, others bad. So what is the goodness of we? That's the center emptied centeredness. That's very important. What kind of this kind of empty centeredness can have a practical meaning in a very concrete setting of our social life? There can be many possible applications, many examples of this empty-centeredness. Here's one. In the domain or context of leadership. Leadership, yes, might be opposing to these empty-centered ideas, because leaders should always be in the centers. Followers, not centers. But there are many different ideas of leadership now discussed. So bilateral leadership, not unilateral. And there are also many versions of bilateral leadership. And agile leadership is one of them. Just say that, okay, so here's a bunch of people participating in the conference or workshop. Some say something, but I hold mic like me now. But you can do that after that in the question and answer sessions. So whenever someone began to speak, so leadership there. But this leadership is not fixed, because conference, workshops, not one-way speech, one-way lectures. So leadership is shifted, very agile way, speedy way, from one person to another, from one speaker to another. That is agile leadership. Leadership is there, but not fixed to one single person. That should be distributed in an agile way from one person to another. I think this is a good example of empty-centeredness. So empty-centeredness can, yes, speak about leadership. And agile leadership is one of those empty-centered leaderness examples. Right. Then, AI and robot. So now there are many AIs, and still very primitive in a sense. In the scale of autonomy. Here the autonomy means a finality of decision-making, collective decision-makings. Okay, and there are two goals, maybe. One is ultimate goal. The other is instrumental goal. It's a sort of a Kantian distinction about goal. So maybe next step of AI. AI can have a freedom to change instrumental goal. But ultimate goal is just fixed, given by human beings, designers. But AI can have a partial autonomy to change instrumental goal while being fixed ultimate goal. That's the next stage. And next stage, maybe AI can have a freedom to shift ultimate goal itself. Then AI become closer to human beings. But that's not enough. If AI can be, in the future, in the end, moral agent, just like human beings, then AI's position in the we should be the same, equal with human beings. Then what is a moral agent? Yes. So here is another Kantian voice we can hear. Okay. What is a moral agent? Let me mention one that is not moral agent. That is, I call moral vending machine. Think of automated driving cars. Now that is becoming to the street here. And now designer should design that. Okay. Never doing bad thing in the streets, of course, because if car doing some excessive speed, that's quite dangerous. So by design, speed of car should reduced to the slower or safe domains. But that is, for me, not a moral agent. That is just moral vending machine. That's a machine that's designed to do only good things. Okay, not to be able to bad thing. And that's good, but that's not moral agent. Our human beings sometimes doing bad thing, but sometimes can do good thing just because that is a good thing to do. If I can do something good thing, even though I can do bad thing, I can be the moral praiseworthy. I can, if I'm a moral vending machine, only designed to good thing, and when I do the good thing, I shouldn't be the morally praised. That's just my design. So moral agent is this kind of agent. That's the quite Kantian Zoran ethic ideas. And if AI or robot, good or not, can have this kind of a moral status, they can do bad thing. But for moral reasons, they try to do good thing. They can be moral agent. And if AI or robot can attain this kind of stage, there's no moral reasons to differentiate human beings and AI, machine, or artifacts. But below that, there should be always some moral justification to differentiate human and AI robot. But that is only reasons allowable. Okay. Then, even below that, okay, now we have just automated AI robots, or not so automated, just other artifacts, computers, tables, shoes, clothes. But in that light of we terms, all of them is a great, important, essential members of we. Without them, I cannot perform any single action at all. Okay. So all members of we should have some sort of moral patience, should be the object of moral concerns or moral agent humans. Even beyond that, I claim that they should have at least minimum moral rights. Rights of social, legal implementations, right? But what kind of a minimum rights that is endowed to those artifacts or natural things, animals or rivers, soils, and artifacts? That is anti-disposal rights, I claim. What is that? So let me first explain what is its opposite, disposal rights. Disposal rights is one implications, in my observation, of current one standard model about moral relation between the human and the robot that's proposed in Europe. That is master-slave model, according to which humans should be masters. Robots, AI, or any artifacts should be slave. So this word is still used. That's an Aristotelian word. Aristotle wrote in its Nicomachean Ethics that, okay, slave is a tool with anima, tool with mind, tool with soul. And slave is a tool with soul. And tools, artifact, is a slave without soul. Okay. And there should be the sort of one-way relations between master and slave or tool. Tool always should serve interest of masters, not vice versa. Just one way of serving, to be served. Human is always something or someone to be served. And slave or tool is something that should always necessarily serve for human interest. So in the light of a serving or service, there's a clear distinction, one-way relations. That is the essence of master-slave model for human and AI robot relationship. And one big implication is disposal rights. What is disposal rights? So according to this model, human is endowed, given disposal rights for its properties, natural or artifacts. I have many properties, artifacts, my clothes, my computers, my cars. I can be disposed of those my properties, artifacts, or even natural things without specific reasons, without good reasons, without cogent reasons. Of course, there are some exceptions. If that's a very culturally important thing, I cannot do that. If throwing away something is quite bad for the environment, I shouldn't do that. But except these exceptional cases, I am allowed to throw away every my belonging without exhibiting, demonstrating some reasons for that. Think of collection day. So each day, so I, or you throw away many things to the collection stations. If we make a mistake about the day, I'm blamed. But I or you, don't need to say, okay, I am throwing away this because blah, blah, blah. I am disposed of this because blah, blah, blah. No need for that kind of justification, excuse. Okay, no excuse level for collection baggage. So this is implicit right that is implicitly endowed to human beings. So we are owners over my belongings, and one of the important aspects of ownership is having disposal rights. One can be disposed of its belongings, artifact or natural, without any specific good reasons. And anti-disposal rights just opposite to that. So we turn, and it's empty-centered model, and has a consequence. Okay, what is a good relationship between human and robot human and artifact AIs? More egalitarian model. I call that fellowship model. Fellowship here means co-adventurers, co-participant of joint collective adventure, risk-taking activities, what is that? Every single, somatic actions, that has some sort of risk. So participant of this somatic action is a participant of adventure, risk-taking enterprise. So they are co-risk takers, co-adventurers. So they should have at least minimum equal rights. What is the minimum equal rights? Anti-disposal rights. Every single my belongings, natural artifacts, should have rights not to be disposed of without good reasons, without right reasons, without cogent reasons. Okay, so there can be many good reasons for that. If some of my computer is broken beyond repair, that might be a good reason to be disposed of. Okay, my computer, consume very, very high energies, electricities. New one is not so. So that might be the good reason to dispose of that. But we need every time, collection day, some good reason to throw it away. That is anti-disposal right that should be given to them. Okay. So that's minimum rights. Everything, natural and artificial style should have. So slavery model has been criticized in environmental philosophy, environmental ethics from the middle of 20th centuries. Environmental ethicists claim, okay, we need slavery emancipations of natural things. But here is another total emancipations from slaveries, not merely natural, but artificial things as well. So that is my alternative model, fellowship model, to the master-slave model, and that is derived from we terms. Okay. So, and this, but this maybe cast some doubts about some people. Okay, now rights there to be given to the computers. And rights and responsibilities always coined, putting together, right? So computer should have responsibilities. And the responsibility is always combined to the punishment idea, punishabilities. Right. Then what is the punishabilities for the computers that doesn't have any pleasure, pain, sensitivities? In the usual understanding, punishment makes sense only for the something that can feel pain. And the punishment is a standard situation giving some pain to compensate their, not achievement of responsibility, not fulfillment of responsibilities. But computers, of course, doesn't have any sensitivity of pain. So for them, punishability or responsibility or rights make sense or not. My idea is quite different. Okay, forget about this kind of pain talk, wall of pain. Here is another alternative to make punishability to the artifacts possible, sensitive. That is prior endowment to them rights. Here, anti-disposal rights. Prior, they have rights. And if they do bad thing, they are used for bad purposes. They are used for this totalitarian way. They should be deprived or suspended their original prior rights, anti-disposal rights. They can be thrown away. They can be destroyed if some device, computer is used by the totalitarian way. So here's another way to make sense, punishabilities for the entities that doesn't have any pain sensitivities. Right. Okay, so now I think, okay, so this kind of quite philosophical talk, I started from the East Asian traditions, that contemporary philosophical revival, and incapability of single actions, and we turns of many sorts, and fellowship model, that is the alternative model to the master-slave model. That's quite philosophical, heavily philosophical talk. But these philosophical talk can have very practical, technological, social, even industrial consequences. Here's one, robotics project in Japan that is called Guardian Robot, like that. So humanoid. So Guardian Robot is to be introduced to our living room, bedroom, in a very private, cozy situations to guard peoples, to guard elderly peoples, to guard infant babies, younger children. And God is something, it's a sort of endow some higher positions, in a sense, than humans. Guardian is a sort of a big, and to be guarded is something lower. And this kind of idea is not allowed at all, master-slave model. So the idea that robot or AI guard human being, just violations of human dignities, human autonomies, human hegemonies. So this kind of idea, its name, its concept should be banned in the light of master-slave model. But this kind of ideas, very, very popular in Japan, and I interviewed some European robotics people, asked about their opinion on the master-slave model. Their answer is just one single voice. They said, so we don't have any intention to produce slave. I'm producing some robot, but that shouldn't be slave. So this is a sort of robotics, guys' ideas. But that's not, in good accord with the master-slave model. So we need something alternative to that if we want to save their voices. And the fellowship model can be one alternative to save their voices. So consequence is a sort of a difference in the development of AI robot. Master-slave model, that's quite one model. And under that, there should be one possibility to produce, to develop robot and AI. But in these possibilities, guardian robot is not allowed at all. So fellowship model, so we can have a different possibilities, different potentialities to develop robot or AI. That may be bad for the master slave model, but not bad from the fellowship model. So difference in the model, that's quite philosophical, may bring about some difference in the potentiality of future industrial technological possibilities. But I don't say the final part. Return is, let me repeat, philosophical system that based on assumptions, more or less persuasive. So I don't say this is the only absolutely right philosophical stance. That's like many other philosophical systems. That has sort of assumptions, maybe wrong, or some or fallible inferences. So this is just one of many possibilities of value proposals. But the important thing to do is to propose as many as possible value options to enrich our options, our lives, options, our values in this 20th century, very global, diversified societies. And this is a mission of Kyoto Institute of Philosophies. So one with the mottos is towards multi-layered value societies. So its emphasis put on multi-layeredness of values. What's that? Now diversity is very important, everyone agrees. So one image of diversity is the left-hand side. Many cubes or spheres that are different colors. One sphere red, one sphere white, one sphere black, or blah, blah, blah. But in a common image, one single sphere has just one single color, only redness or whiteness, blackness. But multi-layer society has a different ideas. Each single sphere, circle, or cube, whatever, should have a different colors, not merged into one single colors. Different colors coexist. Maybe in some cases in opposing way, contradictory ways, but still each single person's identity, single group identity is composed. Different colors coexist. That is, I think, the truth of the many identity talks. And multi-layered society is a sort of a diversity 2.0. And this is a motto, the aim for the Kyoto Institute of Philosophy that I and Marx as well try to propose many values to the world. Don't say our value is the absolute. Our value is just one of them. But by doing that, enrich value options to this multi-layered society, the world. So this is our missions. So let me finish here. Thank you very much.
So I have Zach, Alex, and everybody else. So let's see how far we go. Like Zach, but Zach really was the fish that raising his hand first, so we start with Zach.
Oh, thanks so much.
And then this time I do left. How about that?
Okay, thanks so much. So I'd like to talk about your understanding of what it would be to punish an artifact, to see if we can make sense of that idea. So here's the definition you gave. Disposal or suspension of the use of an artifact. Okay, that counts as punishing an artifact. So we have a transit museum here in New York where they have collected a bunch of old subway cars. And in that museum, they have, of course, suspended the use of those subway cars. So explain to me how those subway cars are being punished by being archived and displayed and cherished. Yeah, well, let's just start with this. This complicates the case because that has a different use. So there is a clear use to subway cars. They're used for transporting people on the subway. It's a very different question what the use of artworks is. So, but they have clearly been taken out of that use. So how are they being punished?
Okay. Subway card. That's something like a disposal thing.
No, they're
No,
disposed,
not sp-
but they are clearly being suspended.
Hmm.
As per your definition.
Yes, and my definition, yes, that means. But that's the usual. Okay, so the people just throw it away when we stop using that. That's right?
No,
No.
put it in a museum in this case.
Put it.
In the case of they
I see.
suspend the use of putting them in a museum.
Okay. And that's one possible ways. But so anti-disposal rights has many, sort of proposals, sort of recommendations. One is just stores in a museum. But in that case, we need many museums, too many museums, too huge museums. We don't have enough room for that. But the other is sort of reuse. And that kind of disposal thing can be reused for other purposes. So one of the practical, recommendations of the very idea of, anti-disposal rights is not put something in the museum, not store that, but reuse, and maybe reuse in the different ways. Maybe we put those things in the sort of reproduction cycle and to produce other thing. So this one of the very practical advice from this kind of anti-disposal rights is reuse. Or maybe we can to put this by old stuff to the reuse market, for example. Like Oxfam. Oxfam is maybe not good examples. There's many bad things about behind that, but that kind of a second use.
Talking past each other, so it's a question about your definition of punishment, not what it is to.
Okay.
Why does that count as
Okay.
seem like it counts?
Okay. And the punishment is connected to the responsibilities. And in the case of humans, if humans do bad things, they should be punished. Right? Yes. Otherwise,
Yeah, I know many people try it.
otherwise punishment is a bad thing. Punishment is allowed only in the case some person do bad thing. And in this case, artifacts, only when artifacts is used for bad purposes. Say surveillance camera, for example. That can be used for the good, ways to protect the peoples, to improve securities of streets. But in other cases, that can be used for the bad, to surveillance by the totalitarian regime, for example. This kind of usage is not good usage. And that if someone or something is used for bad purposes, and that brings about bad consequences, that's good reason for be punished. Here, what important thing is the consequence, rather than will, motivations. Human have a motivation, human has a will, but computer doesn't. But human and computer as well have some consequences. And some consequences are good. That's a consequentialistic idea here. And some consequences are bad. And in the case of artifacts, that doesn't have any will.
So, maybe. So, I think then I'll open it up. I think this is an important one. So, maybe the thought is, okay. So take the subway car, right? And the subway car at some point was part of what Yasuo calls a bad we, right? It's not functioning anymore. You know, the doors opened quick. Someone broke their leg or worse, and it's a risk, and the brakes and all of this. So we take it out. It's like, you know, punishment. It's just that it doesn't have a will. You know, we punish it. But then we allow it to come back if reused, right? So like the equivalent, and the museum would even be maybe an act of kindness, right? We put it in a museum to honor it. It's like, you know, retirement honor, you know, but still
The question was how
yeah,
does
sure.
that count as punishment at all? I don't think it counts as punishment to put it in a museum.
No, in the museum, that's why I would also say the museum would not be the, yes,
Museum
of
thing.
course. Yeah, true.
That counts as punishment.
The museum, I would also not classify the museum as punishment. I would say it's not disposal.
It's
The museum is kind of honoring its
Yes,
past
museum is
achievements.
not punishment, yes.
But on your, that's then a counterexample of your definition. This is a problem for your view. Is the word.
Okay, let me think. Thank you. Oh,
Okay,
many
then
hands.
I do like, so I'm only taking, I know you were early, Alex. I'll make sure that I know Alex was second with the hand, but I try to move from the right.
It's like hitting a buzzer on a game show, you know, who gets the first. So
You know, like we go this way.
I'll try to be
And
very.
I'm sure that if we are running almost out of time, then Alex has the joker.
I'll try to be fast. I mean, just to follow up on the last thing, it seems to me that the language of punishment, and of course one could go further and say objects are forgiven, that all of this is just an attempt, and I'm going to try to massage this a bit and say what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring objects into the sphere of the ethical with the we, right? So let's stick with that project. You know, under the rubric of values, a comment before my question. One thing we've been discussing this week, or I should say selfishly, I've been trying to get us to discuss this week, is the thought that the way to define value is not in relation to other values in the pluralism 1 or 2.0 model, but rather the difference between what is valuable and what's worthless. And so this brings us back to this 2 or 3 slides ago where you talked about disposal. And the way you drew the line between the disposable and the non-disposable, ultimately, it seems to me, and this is why the slavery discussion was important to you, is around use value. So it's still at the level of instrumentality. The good is that which is useful, the bad is that which is useless. And so this is why it seems to me the case of museums, but particularly museums of art, matter. Because art objects are things that we see as valuable because they're useless, because they're purposeless. You see what I mean? In other words, art objects, this is a recent thing. I mean, as you know, museums are just a few centuries old in this regard, but the thought is that round about the time that commodity culture gets going, when it starts to look like the only possible value in the world is use value or consumption value, we start to think, wait a minute, but there are these things that we can't treat as simply use value or consumption value. And in fact, that's where the ethics of objects becomes salient, maybe and even in your sense, that we start to treat these with a kind of reverence, conservation, saving. And so it seems to me that what you'd want to do is just simply disrupt the idea that use value or practical value or instrumentation of value is the horizon of value for objects. That gets us closer to the fellowship with objects model that you want than the punishment idea.
Okay, thank you. And the thing, and it's okay. In the case of we, maritime agent system, every agent is a variable or worthy of a moral patiency at least. That should be treated as a moral, concerns. Not for its use or usable values, but its contributions as a necessary agent to make this, something happens. And that is across the use, but not use. That's a sort of a necessary participation and stuff here. And so everything is respected because that contribute and to something make possible, right? And it should be nuancedly, importantly distinguished from use values, right? Okay, and some of my staffs, agent are my use tools, right? Others not. So many other peoples who are essential for my doing something. And they play a very essential, indispensable role. That's why they are members of we. That is also the case for my tools or my usage, but they are not tools, just essential members to make my doing something possible. So there should be a very different, crucial difference between that kind of participations as a necessary agent and the usabilities, right? And disposal rights, the same thing. And why every artifact that a member of the we should have a disposal rights? Because not because they are usable, not because they are usable, but because they are indispensable necessary agent to this, action possible.
First of all, thank you so much, Deguchi-sensei, for your paper and your talk. It's always lovely when people are just right about things. So I wanted to ask about anti-disposal rights. In particular, it seems to me anti-disposal rights gives us a kind of negative criterion that generates the horizon of how we ought to behave with respect to non-human entities. I'm curious, though, what positive duties that view might entail, right? So it's easy to see that I can't just treat things however I want. I have to be able to give good reasons. But that seems to be sort of the outer limits of my interactions with things. And I'm curious, are there good ways and bad ways to handle this water bottle, for instance? Because it doesn't seem that I can always give good reasons for how I operate, but it seems like your view might want to go there. I'm just curious.
Okay, and maybe positive sense and can be described in this way. So natural environment should be kept, right? And without good reasons to destroy that. So default situation is keep that as it is. So keep everything as it is. So that's the default situations. Of course, we have some good reasons to make our we better, good, or best. To change, we should change something. So, for example, okay, there should be some natural disasters or natural disasters. We should prevent that. So maybe we should do some interventions to natural environment to prevent some sort of a disastrous cyclone, for example. But without that kind of a good reason for many we's, not only human beings, good for the ecological system in one reasons, everything should be kept. Everything should be respected its original existence, original state of affairs. That might be positive sense for their side and for our side as well. Our life, way of life, way of thinking should be kept as it is, without good reasons. So it's a sort of a conservatory ideas behind that. So maybe we can think that is a positive side.
Could I briefly
Yes.
follow up?
Yes.
There are lots, but really, briefly, because there's so many questions.
Can I press?
Yes,
Do you respect what?
Well, I just want to ask, can I press you on what that respect looks like in practice?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, in practice?
Yes.
Well, I do think, okay, so, in practice, how does respect for artifacts look like in practice, I think, is the question.
That's it, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Jose.
Well, thank you very much for the talk. It was great. I'm trying to bridge what you brought here, your philosophical system, with regulation and practice. So let's say we have, for instance, I'll use the European example here. We have the Digital Services Act, which establishes that platforms, let's say social media platforms, have specific duties regarding transparency about their systems, about a specific duty of care for them to reduce the possibility of these social media to be used for like wrong goals. Let's say spread disinformation. So we could say that maybe this is a form of like bringing responsibility to the collective body of a company to the actions that could be bad actions used by individuals, let's say. So like here we have shared responsibility in some degree, but like I would like to hear, according to your system, how does this would apply to the system itself, let's say to the recommendation algorithms that are being deployed by the platform? So this is the first question. The second question is there, we are talking about punishing these systems, so like more of a negative action at first hand. Is there a possibility also to think about not allowing these systems to exist at first hand, so like an a priori responsibility or prohibition, punishment?
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and multi-agent system has many different kinds of agent. And the system can be one of them. That's a sort of abstract entities. That also the member of this agent, right? And the system has sort of at least partial responsibility and partial rights. And if that contributes to bring up some bad thing, that system should be, changed, redeemed, or stopped to exist. So system is just one of the many different or diverse kinds of agent of this multi-agent system. For example, some sort of even fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes or something like that, can influence my doing something. So this Sherlock Holmes is also the member of this we. Yes. And that can have a sort of a right and responsibility as well, even fictional characters.
All right, thank you so much for the talk. It's a fascinating set of theses. Just one question to better understand the system. So it's not a critique at all, it's just to better understand. I wonder how your kind of metaphysical views on the self and we relation relates to maybe an influential strand in philosophy at the intersection of social metaphysics and value theory. And the view that I have in mind is one that is kind of a reactivation of both, say, Aristotle and Hegel. So first, Aristotle, let's say the social thesis, right? The fact that we are intrinsically social and political animals, and it's about the interiority of the social over individuality. And the Hegelian part is about the role of intersubjectivity in the constitution of self-identity, right? So for a Canadian like me, this is through Charles Taylor that we got these views, and that gives us the dialogical self and a certain way to conceive the relationship between the self and the collectivity. So my question is that it seems that you want to go one step further, right, by granting entities that are not living animals endowed with will, consciousness, and so on. You want to integrate them in the system. But why do you see them as agents if, let's say that we're talking about artifacts, for instance, they don't have the capacity for autonomous action or desires, will, and so on. So I'm not quite sure that I see what are the reasons why you want to integrate them in the category of agents. And if you don't, well, it spares you from some difficult questions, right, about the status of these kinds of entities.
Okay, thank you. So my answer to your first part of your questions. So there are many we philosophers, maybe Aristotle, Hegel, or Charles Taylor, or communitarians. There should be some similarities between them and my ideas. But if there is some difference between me and they, and the important thing is, again, first incapability thesis, incapability of single actions. Some communitarians said, okay, our identity is, consists of we-ness, our cultural, community, idea, values. Here is identity talk. My talk is not about identity. My talk about somatic actions. I claim every single action is impossible. Every action is collective. If Aristotle, Hegel, Charles Taylor, other philosophers agree in that respect, no substantial difference between Wheaton's system and their philosophies. Right. That's quite crucial, sort of, differential point, right? And agencies. Agency has many meanings. And the original English meaning of agency, according to the OED, is something like a chemical agent that doesn't have any mind, any mental activities, consciousness, intention at all. That is just something that exercises causal power to bring something happens. That's a baseline of agency here. Of course, some agency in we, human beings, along with that kind of a causal efficacy, sort of an intention or whatever will. But baseline of agency here is exercise of a causal efficacy. And in that respect, every single entity in the world has the same thing. Yes.
Thank you. That was actually the perfect question and answer to precede mine. So I have a question about moral praiseworthiness and the sufficiency conditions of this multi-agency nexus. So as you argue, the multi-agency nexus is a necessary and sufficient condition for somatic action. I think this accords well with our folk intuitions about how action is possible, just using tools or our reliance on institutions to make things possible, right? And this doesn't, but I'm worried about this non-conscious clause of the multi-agency. So you say the multi-agency nexus is non-conscious, and that's part of the necessary and sufficient conditions. Now, this doesn't have any issue for moral blameworthiness because there's such thing as morally culpable ignorance, right? We don't have to have a moral intention as a causal antecedent to our behavior to be responsible for our behavior. But moral praiseworthiness, it would seem that a moral intentional state as a causal antecedent to behavior would be necessary for moral praise. Otherwise, we're praising people for behavior that is only accidentally moral. So my question is, unless we accept something like overdetermination, it's not really clear why that would be a bad thing, but unless we do accept something like overdetermination and say that moral intentional state, a conscious state, is a necessary or part of the sufficiency conditions of moral action, I'm not sure how we even think about moral praise within the framework.
Thank you. And again, there are many agencies in this multi-agent system. And some are moral agents in the full sense. In contrast to the moral bending machines. So now only humans maybe the moral full-fledged moral agent, right? And animals maybe not, artifacts are not. So the animals artifact some sort of a minimum, in the case of artifacts, is a minimum responsibility, minimum rights. So in this case, I'm appealing to the consequentialist ideas, rather than will or goodwill, bad will, that kind of thing. So every agent, if that contribute to the bad result, that should have some sort of moral responsibilities. But their responsibilities are lower than moral agent's responsibility for contributing to the bad thing. And conversely, moral agent rights is bigger than those smaller stuffs. So there is a weighting of a moral responsibility, moral rights. And the moral agent should have biggest, largest responsibility and largest rights as well.
So just for procedure notes, correct?
Yes.
Alex, then let's see who we can fit in, and then I do propose already that I'm certain that it's not that the left was just quiet, the left was preparing its attack, or it's going to get a question. and then we can continue, like add like maybe 30 minutes to the discussion in the afternoon, just to make sure that we all get a chance to interact with the view, you know, from identity to we-dentity.
It's face.
Wonderful talk and so much in it. So I'm continuing the theme of Jocelyn and Thomas, pressing you on the need in your theory for more emphasis on the autonomy of the I. You say explicitly in your slides, the we turn is a turn to not I, but we. But I'd suggest that Hegel, again, kind of got it right, where what you really want is an I that is a we and a we that is an I. And this... just Hegel. So
yes,
like
that's Hegel.
You mentioned in your
Yasuo is used to this. Yeah. Every time I hear speak about this, the Hegelian spirit comes out.
Yes.
So specifically, so you're trying to ground the I in the we, and early on in your talk, you sort of dismiss the concept of self-consciousness as individualistic bias, to think that we're aware of each of our actions.
Yes.
And you justify this on the basis that an individual agent can't be an infallible judge of their actions in the sense of, like, what have I done? Their tat, their deed. And that's certainly true. But I'd argue that the individual does have to be self-conscious of his or her Handlung, her action, insofar as we all, in our very action, are responsive to reasons for why we're doing it, and this is constitutive of what makes it not just a reflex, but a morally valuable action. And without that, you couldn't be human at all. But that responsiveness means you have to put your actions to the court of the values of others. The Hegel point is just to generalize that and say that, well, the we itself, to be a collective agent, is also dependent on the individuals putting forward their views. And so you need to basically abandon not self, not try to have your cake and eat it too, and like really build in the I as a sort of fundamental constitutive aspect. And if you do that, then yes, I kind of agree with the previous two speakers, then the AIs would not be part of a fellowship, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so there's a difference between the we turn and Hegel. So in the case of Hegel, I equal to we, that is equal to self. Two equals. Three items are identified. Okay, that's Hegel's idea, so very roughly speaking. And in my we-turn system, we is equal to self, but only one equality. I is a members of a we, okay? And we is equal to self. So here's one quite crucial difference between the relation I and we. So Hegel equal, identities. In my case, membership. That's the difference. Other big difference is, in my interpretation of Hegel, Hegel's we is center occupied by I. In this case, that is an objective self, objective selbst, he said. And that is occupied centers always. And in this center occupied person, every private interest should be equal to the public interest. Everyone claims my private interest is just equal to the public interest. So I'm a right person, I'm a real public servant or something like that. So everyone wants to occupy the center. So zero-sum game of center occupancy. That is one idea of Hegelian we, I, self. And my idea of a we is not that kind of we. That's the big difference between that. But I know there are many possible interpretations of Hegel, right? So maybe other interpretations of Hegel is very similar to we terms. That's one possibility. And again, so there are many different agencies. So every agency of we, even artifacts, should have some minimal rights. Okay, but that's a minimum. There should be the differentiations, distributions of different degrees. And self-conscious entities should have, of course, more responsibility, more rights, should occupy the more paracentric positions. And life, of course, should occupy more paracentric position than no life, right? So that kind of differentiations should be made among we members. And self-consciousness is a very important element in differentiation of that occupation of paracentric or less paracentric positions. I agree with that.
Lisbeth, Alex, and then everybody else later.
Thank you very, very much for the talk. I really enjoyed the first part, especially where you kind of, I guess from my perspective, expand the range of agency to include non-intentional beings, which I think is a really important extension in the age of digital information and how we influence each other. But what I am curious about is your distinction between agency and responsibility. In particular, I'm curious, it seems from your definition that you understand responsibility as a form of punishability, liability, so the ability to be punished for wrongdoing in my actions. But what I'm curious about is how that still sets apart a moral vending machine from a moral agent. That distinction becomes a little bit curious for me, because I would try to push and see if moral responsibility doesn't entail something a bit more than just being punishable, but instead entails the ability, like you said, for practical reason to commit myself to something. And I guess a practical way in which this problem would come about is when it comes to the rights of artificial agents, is who endorses and upholds those rights and why. I'd say that would come down to responsible agents, which have a slightly different standing than just moral vending machines and agents.
And that's quite true. And so, yes, and I told and respond to the many questions. There should be some sort of difference in modes or difference in degrees among many agents within the we. So that might mean that, okay, there are many different responsibilities, different source or kinds of responsibilities. Everyone or every member of the we has a responsibility. That's quite a consequentialist sense of responsibilities. If some I or humans or some artifact is in effect and as a consequence contribute to the bad we, they should have responsibilities. That's quite consequentialistic ideas, right? But in the case of, yes, as I respond to your questions, self-consciousness is very specific, more important, heavily idea related to the rights and responsibilities. Here's another sort of responsibility here. So there are many different sorts, modes of responsibilities. That depends on the different modes of sorts of agencies. Yes.
Last but not least, for this part of the discussion.
From the left, from the left.
Alex Englander from the far left.
I take that as a compliment.
That's just a description.
Just a description. If I understood you, a lot depended upon the idea of incapacity or incapability.
Incapability, yes.
And I probably misunderstood it, but I don't really have much of a grip on that idea. So the notion of doing something by oneself or doing it all by oneself is deeply context dependent. If I say that Jan built the house by himself, then the truth or falsity of what I say depends upon what the relevant alternative is. Is it that he didn't need Marcus's help? Is it that he needed machinery? Is it that despite his organizational skills, he's not God and so he didn't create the building materials ex nihilo?
Yes.
So in the absence of a specific form of dependency, merely pointing to the dependency of human beings in general doesn't seem to give us any content to the idea of doing something by oneself. And if one simply pushes the idea in any given case whatsoever, then we lose the idea of a doing or an action whatsoever. So if Jan, I don't know, raises his hand, and I say, well, he didn't do it all by himself, and you say, why? Did he need a mechanical aid? And I say, no, no, no. Well, he needed to have a hand, he needed space in which to do it. Then we need a notion of raising one's hand that isn't dependent upon having a hand or doing it in space, and then we lose the idea of doing altogether.
I think that's quite a good observation. I quite agree with that. So in our common usage of doing something, it's quite context dependent. That's quite a universal phenomenal symptom of ordinary language usage. That's quite true. That's quite true. But some philosophers, Kant, or maybe Hegel, and Kant, talking about autonomies. That's a bit, and independent from a common usage language context. And that's quite a single action in my observations, right? And Hegel used the very important word, self-standing, that adapted by the Heidegger in his own side. And this self-standingness, in my interpretation, is also doing something, at least a very important thing, alone. So they conceptualize this kind of single action possibilities. Not all things, but some very crucial important thing. And so their, I think, idea is quite independent from our ordinary usage of this kind of doing talk. And in that respect, I totally agree with you. Yes.
I mean, Descartes would say, like Jan didn't do it; it was his hand, and if Jan killed you, Kant would say that Jan didn't do it. It was just the pathology of the universe. So like the problem arises, I think, everywhere in interesting ways, right?
Well, all I'd say is, the only sense I can make of it is then some idea of Kantian pure willing. I mean, if I...
Sure.
The thing is, what does one think? If I, say, want to throw a ball to Z, and I do it 100 times, for one time, he doesn't get the ball because you leap in and catch
Sure.
it. Do we want to say that, well, because I'm dependent upon you not doing that, I don't have a capacity to throw a ball to Z, such that when I
Sure.
exercise it, what I've done is,
Of course.
is nothing short of throwing the ball to Z. I say, no, of course I have the capacity to do that, and when I exercise it, so long as nothing interferes, that's my doing. And we don't need to bring in any other kind of source of agency whatsoever.
Okay, good. I'll just leave the analysis at that. Let's thank Yasuo first and foremost.